Okay, and I'm back with House of the Dragon episode 2, so if you haven't seen it, this will contain spoilers, but I'm going to give you a bit of a warning before I get to that. So as always, I'm Al, this is the Geek in Review, and let's get to it. So yeah, I've been waiting all week for this, and it was a pretty solid episode. After the first one broke every fucking viewing figure that HBO ever has, it's now sitting at 100 million views or something, or it could be if you watch this in 5 years time, who knows. So yeah, it's safe to say that this show, already commissioned for a second season, has been a bit of a hit. But we've got Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power coming up soon, and it's going to be very interesting to see how these two shows balance out or go against each other, because the Lord of the Rings show is dropping the first 2 episodes straight away, so they're kind of almost playing catch up with House of Dragons, but I'm going to get to that later on. So yeah, again, I've been waiting all week for this, and I really enjoyed this episode. It delivered for me exactly what I was expecting and hoping for. This is really the setup episode. The first one was really to me felt like the reintroduction to this world and letting us know where these characters are and what's going on. Whereas in this episode, by the end of it, there's sort of clear divides and conflicts and power struggles that you can see that are going to play out in later episodes and later seasons, but it's all getting set up, including an adversary that they mentioned last week as well, the crab feeder. If you don't remember that, it was during the small council scene at the start. I thought this guy was going to pop up, but it looks as if he's going to be the main big bad for some of the Targaryens to deal with. Again, depending on your point of view, because is Daemon the big bad? Who knows? But I don't think everyone's going to like this episode. It is a much slower pace, it is much more character building, especially the relationships between the king, his daughter and Daemon. We also get to see what some of the other characters might be up to or might be planning long term as well. But as always, it's Game of Thrones and these plans might never come to fruition, or they might get killed before they can get to finish them. So that's a non-spoiler chat out the way, so I'm going to get straight into the main chat for the episode. And there's not a lot of spoilers in this one, to be honest. It's a bit like the first episode and people are like, don't tell me what happened. It's like, well, there's not a lot to spoil. It was just a setup for the story and the characters that we're going to meet. But we do get a new intro, but not a new theme. It is the old Game of Thrones theme, and I'm kind of surprised that they went with that. To be honest, I thought they would have maybe tried to differentiate this show a little bit more from the first one, but it's a hook and it's what people are familiar with, and I'll be honest, I did miss the Game of Thrones theme in last week's episode, so I can't complain about that too much. And let's get another thing out the way. There's going to be time jumps in this show. The second episode is set about 6 months after the first one, and there's going to be greater time jumps in the show as well. We're actually going to see some actors replaced with older actors for the characters. I don't want to get into too many spoilers here, but if you go onto the IMDb cast list, and you can figure out who's going to get replaced with an older version and who's not. So yeah, as I was saying, the crab feeder who was mentioned last week, we get to see who this guy is straight away, and it does seem that he's been set up to be an antagonist for some of the characters here, but we don't really know what this guy's about too much. One thing that Game of Thrones done, apart from the Night King, is it made its villains quite three-dimensional, so I hope that there is more to the Crab King rather than it's just someone who wants to get land and wants to get power. But as always, we're going to have to wait and see with that. So the crab feeder has been doing some damage, and Corlys wants revenge for the losses that he suffered in his fleet. And although the king said he was going to focus on his daughter in the last episode, he's not really listening to what she has to say about things and sort of palms her off to select a new king's guard. While Alicent, our best friend with the dark hair, seems to be doing what her father wants and getting closer to the king and his daughter, and that's going to pan out in huge ways towards the end of this episode. So yeah, for all his talk, the king isn't really getting his daughter on board. He's sort of just treating her as decoration. I think he doesn't know what his next move is going to be. This episode, when it comes to the king, is mainly focused on who is the next queen going to be. And yeah, man, there's some awkward scenes there, but we're going to get to that in a second. So So we're beginning to get a bit of a sense of where these people are and how everyone fits in. Kralis, I'm never really sure how to pronounce that, thinks that maybe the king isn't doing the best job in all aspects, and he actually suggests that the king marry his young daughter to strengthen both their families, and especially his family's position, because this guy's got the most sizable navy fleet, it seems, at least it's on the king's side. So you're going to want to keep a guy who's got that sort of strength behind them on your side at the end of the day. So it does seem that in these last 6 months, not a lot has particularly happened. The king's been grieving, the whole sort of kingdom just seems to have been a bit on pause and kind of holding their breath as to what's going to happen next. But people are definitely starting to get their claws into the king, and maybe sooner rather than later, because he's fallen apart and he's not getting any better from his illness that was mentioned in the first episode. I'm not sure if that's grayscale or not. They've not really went into it too much. I think it probably is. So we know at this point in Game of Thrones that this is going to be a pretty lethal disease if it is grayscale. If it's something else, we're going to have to wait and see how that one plays out. So with marriage on his mind, he shares Kralis' plan with Hightower, who isn't really best pleased with it because he's trying to set up his own daughter to be the new queen. And when he meets Kralis' daughter, let's say that she's a little on the young side, and we're beginning to see that Game of Thrones power dynamic that we all love, and let's be honest, that we all watch the show for. Because everyone's trying to get a little bit of the king here and trying to sort of get their seat at the table before the next big move or the next big change. But as it said in this episode, it's the order of things, so you're literally selling your child for a better seat at the table, especially if the new queen produces a son, because that's going to skip the princess or the queen that's going to be announced. And speaking of the princess, Rhaenyra is sort of caught in the middle of this episode. She's named queen, but people seem to want to still have a male on the throne, and she does have a conversation about this and how sort of women are not going to be taken seriously in Westeros at this point, no matter how much power is behind them. But speaking of people that want to be on the throne, although he's not in it much this episode as last week, Matt Smith aka Daemon still has a lot going on. Married again, which as far as I can tell his wife's still alive, so I'm not too sure how that one's going to land. And to celebrate his wedding and the birth of his new child, he stole some dragon eggs, which are a pretty big deal for the House of Dragons, and taking Dragonstone, which is a ceremonial seat, away from the princess or the future queen. And we do see some Dragonstone in this episode, and it does look a little bit what we've seen like in Game of Thrones. I've got some qualms about the CGI in this episode, I'm going to get to that at the end. We don't see as much of it as I would have liked. And again, although Matt Smith isn't really in this episode too much, his presence is certainly felt in the later half. You get the idea that this guy is sort of biding his time for his next move. He's sort of just lashing out, and you're not really sure what direction he's going to go in, other than to maybe make the king look bad or make the family look bad so that he can sort of usurp them. So the king obviously wants his dragon egg back and his brother in place, and he wants to go and take care of business himself, but Hightower insists he go to Dragonstone to sort Daemon out. And it goes as well as you'd think. Targaryens don't like taking orders even if they're wrong. And remember, he's got a dragon called Caraxes that he can just say no with, and that's the way that the conversation is going until Rhaenyra shows up. And sort of, I wouldn't say even the odds, but it comes down to a sort of Cold War, mutual destruction scenario. Now, one of the great scenes in the first episode that I didn't really talk about too much was when Rhaenyra meets Daemon in the throne room. The visual storytelling in that scene is letting us know that these two characters are going to go at it throughout this season, and there's going to be a real power struggle here. And we begin to see the first aspects of this at this scene in Dragonstone in this episode. And it's certainly not going to be the last time that we're going to see these two face off. I knew we were going to get a power struggle from them, but I didn't think we were going to get to see this early on in the season. So anyway, she sort of saves the day, but without anyone's permission. So Daemon's pissed, Hightower's pissed, and her dad's pissed, because he makes a good point. When she went to Dragonstone to confront Daemon, he just could have killed her there and sorted out his problem for the future, and then all he's got to deal with is the king. And by the end of this episode, we see that the king's position maybe isn't as solid as he thinks it is. So Daemon's plan doesn't really go to plan. He bluffed and he was caught out. And Daemon isn't the only one getting married. The king decides to pick a new bride, and it's Alicent Hightower. So playing into whatever Otto's long-term plans are here, but also maybe creating a new enemy with Corollas. Because yeah, definitely creating one actually, because this guy is pissed as shit. And he kicks off straight away, running into the arms of Daemon. So alliances are being formed here and conflicts are coming. By the looks of it, he wants Daemon to go after the Crab Eater to sort of humiliate the king and solidify Daemon's power. So we're getting the sort of three sides to this sort of story, or maybe four. We've got the king who's kind of losing his power, the daughter who should be queen who's trying to solidify her place, Daemon who's just trying to carve out where his place in this world is going to be, and then we've got Hightower and Corollas who are just sort of plotting their own plots. Now, I'm not going to talk about spoilers for Lord of the Rings or anything like that, but what I will say is I've seen the first two episodes, and the way that this show has set itself up with these two opening episodes is very similar to what the Rings of Power does. You get a pretty solid introductory episode that takes you back into the world of Lord of the Rings, and it does feel very Tolkien familiar without feeling too much like it's ripping off Peter Jackson, but the second episode is a lot more slower paced. So it's going to be interesting to see what the viewing figures are for these two shows, but more interestingly, is it going to be this show hangs on to the amount of viewers that it had from last week given the slower paced episode. I think there'll be a few that will drop off, but this show is just reminding people how much they missed Game of Thrones and this world. So I'm more interested to see what the final viewing figures are going to be for the last episode, and especially what the piracy figures are going to be, because that's always a big indicator as well. But while it was a slower pace, I really did enjoy this episode, although I have to say some of the CGI did let it down, particularly when it came to the cityscapes and the bits when they were standing on Dragonstone. You could tell that they weren't there, whereas in Game of Thrones it was actually a real castle. I think it was in Ireland that they used. So I'll give it a COVID pass because of everything that's happened in the last few years, but another gripe would be this show isn't getting its own theme tune. But one of the things that worries me about this show is it's going to rely on the familiarity we have with this world in Game of Thrones, and by that I mean references. We got quite a few last week where, you know, the King's Dagger, that's the one that Arya used to kill the Night King, and him mentioning about the Long Winter and the Targaryen on the throne. I really hope they avoid that, because people need to just get into this show for what it is, and this show needs to stand on its own 2 feet without relying on the 8 seasons of Game of Thrones that we've had so far. But overall, I'm really enjoying the series so far. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Did you enjoy episode 2? What do you think is going to happen with all these alliances and things that are getting built up? And are you going to watch the Rings of Power? Are you looking forward to that more as well? If you've made it this far, as always, leave a like on the video. And if you haven't done it already, please subscribe to the channel. It's only one small click for you, but it means the absolute world to me. As always, I'm Al. Thanks for watching.